And now, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, a special hello goes out to the Director of Media for the Boston Bruins alumni, Mr. Mark Howe. Nice to see you, Marky.
Welcome to the Pro Hockey Alumni Podcast, the home of behind-the-scenes interviews, stories, and memories that celebrate the heritage of the great game of hockey. The Pro Hockey Alumni Podcast is hosted by Mark Howe. Episode 22 of the Pro Hockey Alumni Podcast features the personable Jordy Douglas, a WHA and NHL pro who scored 33 goals with the Hartford Whalers in 1979-80. After a great junior career at the Flin Flon Bombers, Jordy elected to sign with the New England Whalers of the World Hockey Association in 1978. With the Whalers, he teamed with hockey legends like Johnny McKenzie, Davey, Keon, and Gordie Howe as he learned the ropes of playing big league hockey. Jordy scored a goal in his first WHA game and really found his groove in the postseason. As a result of this strong performance, he joined Mark Howe as one of the only two protected Whaler skaters in the 1979 NHL Expansion Draft. With the legendary Keon as his centerman, in 1979, Jordy established himself as a legitimate NHL scoring threat. A highlight was a 4-goal game versus the eventual Stanley Cup champion New York Islanders. Unfortunately, in Game 77 of that season, Douglas suffered a broken collarbone, an event that began a cycle of serious injuries that would plague him for the rest of his career. Now, he'd later play with the Minnesota North Stars and the Winnipeg Jets and conclude his career with a prolific 2-year stay in Finland. Upon his retirement, Jordy found significant business success teaming with ex-New York Ranger Ted Irvin in the financial management industry. Jordy is an articulate, funny, and all-around good guy, and you'll enjoy his perspective on his days in hockey and beyond. Just a reminder to subscribe to the podcast and leave a rating wherever you listen to podcasts. To learn more about the Pro Hockey Alumni, visit prohockeyalumni.org. Now, let's talk classic hockey with Jordy Douglas. Our guest today is one of hockey's good guys, former Hartford Whaler, Minnesota North Star, Winnipeg Jet, Jordy Douglas. Jordy, thanks for being with us today.
Mark, thank you so much. I know you and I have had this song and dance going for a while, so I appreciate the opportunity.
No, we appreciate it. And last time I saw you, of course, was in Hartford. The Yard Goats baseball team had a reunion of Whaler players, which they do every year, and that's a fun event. It seems like when I see you guys together, no time has passed. You kind of pick right up. It seemed like you had a lot of fun yourself.
Isn't that the truth? And by the way, isn't that scary? We're all kind of reliving our youth a little bit. Obviously, I mean, we're all many years removed, and but two things come to mind, Mark, when you say that. One is just how well we were treated in Hartford those many years ago, and more importantly, how we all as players kind of bonded in that environment. I mean, you know, I got to see some of guys that had such an influence on me personally, but now we're all we're all ancient now, and we can sit and tell stories on a kind of a different level. Right. Not as it's just not as competitive. It's about life and the mysteries of the universe, and we're not hiding anything. We're pretty much out there, and I guess the best thing about teammates that become good friends is the fact that, and you know this, when you can be apart for many years, when you get together, you just pick up like you never left. So that's the sense we get when we show up in Hartford. Absolutely. It was a unique time in history. One of those you kind of had to be there to appreciate it. Small community of very loyal fans, a team that, by the time you had joined, had been forced to move out of the building in Hartford due to the roof collapsed. Fans followed the team all the way up to Springfield and then back. And it was a unique time in hockey history, a unique community, and a lot of those bonds and ties still exist today. Yeah. Well, just a couple points to that, and I totally concur. And I often say to people that ask me, you played, 10 years, and where'd you have your most fun? Like, what was the best part? And here's the ironic thing, Mark. Honest to God, I tell this truthfully. The most fun I ever had when I look back, was my very first year in the WHA with the New England Whalers. I just didn't know it. It was my first year, and I was, the proverbial wet behind the ears, trying to, figure out where I fit in and what it was all about. But when I look back, I go, what a wonderful experience. We as you know, was it I-91 club or whatever? I mean, I lived in Manchester, and we everybody kind of lived in and around Hartford, whether it was Avon, whatever, and we'd commute every day, pretty much every day for games when we played and some practices. But what I remember is when we did practice up there, there'd be a caravan of us coming back down I-91,
right.
And I remember we used to all stop at there was a Wendy's about halfway down the highway, and we'd pull in there, and here come the New England Whalers, Gordie, Howe, and everybody ordering our Frosties, and I mean, really the fun we had without knowing it at the time, it was wonderful, really was.
Yes, it was Major League Hockey with some minor league, and I don't say that derogatorily, but it was so much more. You were so much more integrated into the community than perhaps players are today.
Oh yeah.
And you were so much more accessible, and that's not a knock on anybody today. It's just the nature of it. Speaking, when you were growing up in Winnipeg, the team. The local team, of course, was the World Hockey Association's Winnipeg Jets. And that was a very, very good team, as you know, with great historical significance to the game. Did you have a chance? I know that the early years were years you may have been a fan with Bobby Hull, Chris Boardlow, Norm Bowden that first year. And then by year 3, the European invasion, if you want to call it that, with Anders Hedberg, Ulf Nilsson, Lars-Erik Schuberg, Kurt Larson, and the Finns, Veli Katola, and Hexi Riorante. As a fan, as a kid growing up and as a hockey player, what type of, I guess I would ask, impact did those teams have on you as a young person?
Well, okay, so here's my history. I grew up a block away from the Winnipeg Arena, so I knew how to sneak in that building. So in 1972, when the Jets showed up in the WHA, I was starry-eyed like most every other kid. Prior to that, we'd get the Minnesota North Stars would have training camp the odd time here, so we'd see the guys. But when the WHA showed up in the Jets, I have to tell you, until I went to play junior in Flin Flon, I religiously snuck in that building. That was my cathedral, and and in those days it wasn't nearly as security based as it is today. But but I'd watch. And here's the ironic thing. As much as I was a fan, I was learning. I was watching, and now all these many years later, every one of those guys you've mentioned are friends of mine. Because of the Jets alumni, I'm very very involved here in Winnipeg. We just had a big event in Helsinki when the Jets went over there to play Florida, and all those Finns were there, and they still come back to Winnipeg. That's how much of an impression the city had on that team, but. You learn from watching. I mean, it's one thing to play the game, and it's pretty, it's a fast-paced game. But you're learning by watching other guys. I mean, when I sat on a bench, I watched guys all the time. And but everybody in this city that remembers the WHA still has a passion for it. I mean, they're still acknowledged here in Winnipeg. As a matter of fact, Mark, we just lost the very first captain the Jets had, passed away this summer.
Right.
A dear friend of mine, Ann McDonald, and there was over 1,200 people turn out for that man's funeral. I mean, all these many years later, that's how well regarded and respected he was, and that whole era. It impacted Winnipeg, and you mentioned all those names. It impacted hockey. It changed the game of hockey. When you started bringing Ulf Nilsson and Anders Hedberg and all those guys over, I think, and I'm pretty sure you know this. I mean. Glenn Sather was famous for saying the Edmonton Oilers teams of the 80s that won the Cups were patterned after the Jets teams of the 70s that had all those Europeans.
Right.
I mean, that's an incredible compliment. The sad part about the Winnipeg Jets is that they started to lose players vis-a-vis economics. I mean, the Hedberg and Nilsson signed with the Rangers, and then when the merger occurred, I don't know if any other team of the 4 that went in were raked over the coals as badly as the Jets were for talent. They lost all their talent, and so there was a real dark time here. I mean, they were in the NHL and excited about it, but they lost all their young guys. It would have been interesting to see how they would have played had they been able to bring those bodies forward.
I love that Winnipeg team. That was the first team I ever saw in Hartford as an opponent, and I was just mesmerized. And the pride that the fans of that era still have in that team, and the closeness of the team is really remarkable. And we did a tribute podcast to Ad McDonald, and again, the outpouring was unbelievable. So it's great. Now, speaking of the Jets, Jordy, when you're done, when you're in your last year at Flin Flon, you're having a terrific year. It becomes apparent that you're going to get an offer to play Major League Hockey somewhere. The Winnipeg Jets are interested in you. The WHA doesn't really have an official draft of any note, but the Jets are interested, the hometown Jets, and, of course, the New England Whalers, and you have an NHL draft pending.
Correct.
Ultimately, you choose to come to New England, a team that is almost like a hockey museum on skates. I mean, it's got it's unbelievable. Yes. Boyhood idols, I assume, Gordie Howe, Dave, Keon. I'm assuming, I'm kind of speaking for you, but I'm assuming that that opportunity for a young man like yourself to play with that type of historical significance type of players swayed you from staying at home with Winnipeg.
Big time, Mark. I was brought up, at that time my lawyer was a fellow by the name of Normie Kaplan. He was out of Montreal, God bless him, he's since passed. But, when I hooked up with him, he said, look, really, I was at the tail end of the WHA, as it turned out, and all he ever said was, look, we'd love to have a couple of, we'd love to have two leagues bidding on a player. That's exactly what you want, right? And they had no draft, as you mentioned, in the WHA, but I came out of junior with some significant numbers and had a really outstanding career, and I really became a player kind of my last year of junior. And then all of a sudden, Winnipeg got interested in me because I grew up a month, like literally a block away. I mean, I laugh about it where, I seriously tell my friends, for years I used to sneak in the building, and now they're inviting me in the front door to talk about paying me. It's like talk about full circle. And I met Bobby Hull, and they rolled out the carpet. I mean, they were doing their best to get me to sign with Winnipeg, and I'm not going to lie. I mean, up until New England got involved in the bidding, it was significant for me to consider because, they were very generous, and then New England got involved. They thought, well, wait a minute, obviously this kid's interested. So then I had both New England and Winnipeg bidding, and this is basically 3 weeks before the NHL draft. And you know what? I was, once New England got involved, and you're right, Mark, you start talking about, Gordie Howe, and Dave Keon, Johnny McKenzie, and Brad Selwood, Ricky Lee, and Al Smith, John Garrett, and Andre Lacroix. Mm-hmm. I'm just going like, why wouldn't I consider this? And that was the mitigating issue going there, was just wanting to be in that company, hopefully making the team and being in that company. And, and I guess I was a little bit, I don't want to say tainted, that's not fair, but I just shared with you where I snuck in and I saw the Jets like anytime I wanted. So it was like they weren't new to me anymore. They were kind of the, they were the local squad. And part of it too was I don't know, I wasn't confident enough at that time to want to start my career at home. I just thought it'd be one thing to play in front of mom and dad, but there'd be so many people that would be, I guess the word I'll use is judgmental. That's probably not fair, but there'd be a lot more people in my peer group that would be conscious of me, and I felt probably not as confident that I could start here and build my career with that hanging over me. But in New England, it was the perfect setting for me, and that's really why I went.
You make the decision, come to the New England Whalers. You come into Bradley Airport. You get to the hotel for training camp, and they hand out the room assignments. And you find out that you've got a future Hall of Famer with you. What's that like? I mean, I just can imagine that feeling of being a young guy like yourself, 19 years old or whatever, and hey, here's your roommate. Here you go. So what a way to start. Tell me about that.
Well, so at the time that I showed up, another fellow by the name of Jeff Brubaker, we were the two young guys that the Whalers signed. So I kind of quickly met Jeff because we were kindred spirits. We'd played, he played with Peterborough, I played with Flin Flon. We almost made the Memorial. They did, and Memorial Cup. So we kind of just casually hooked up, and he went, he said, who's your roommate? I thought, Dave Keon. He goes, I got Johnny McKenzie. So we make our way to the hotel rooms, and really we don't know anybody. I don't know anybody, and I learned early on, not that I practice it today, Mark, you know me, but I learned that the good Lord gives you 2 ears and 1 mouth, and you should use them in proportion. And I did when I was early in my career. I don't do that anymore, but I showed up. I go to my hotel room, and I'm strict on the. They sent me, a regime of my training. I mean, I was a keener, my first year pro. I don't want to disappoint anybody. Mm-hmm. And I'm in my room. I'm watching TV. I'm sitting on the edge of the bed, and all of a sudden the key fumbles in the door a little bit, And I'm thinking, oh, here we go. Dave Keon walks in, and if you know Dave, I have the utmost respect for Dave Keon. He is the consummate professional, but he's also a very quiet man. He's kind of the, pay attention when he speaks, because he doesn't do that very often. Mm-hmm. And I totally love the man, respect him to death, and he came in and he kind of nodded, and I kind of, like, hi, Mr. Keon, and when I get nervous, I start talking a lot, and I want to break the ice, and I'm thinking, what am I going to say? And so finally, and he's fumbling around a little bit, getting organized, putting his stuff away and putting his shaving kit away, and I finally look at him and I say, I'm a graduate of your hockey school. He goes, what? Yeah, the Billy Harris Dave Keon Hockey School. You came to Winnipeg, and I went and met you there. And he's looking at me like I only met about 1,000 kids that day, and I said, but I had no idea what to say. And he kind of looked at me and said, well, that's good. And he said, well, I'm gone. I'll see you later on. And he left, and I never saw him again till, bedtime, so to speak. So it was just, listen, that was the first meeting. But Mark, after that, they made you feel really welcome once they knew the lay of the land and they knew who was going to be around, because this is training camp. There's lots of bodies, right? So, mm-hmm. But that first day, first visit, so to speak, was I still remember it very well and very fondly.
You get through that, you get through training camp, and you have a memorable beginning to your Major League career, because I think your first game was on the road in Lake Holisay in Quebec, and you, I think you scored in that game as well.
How do you remember this stuff? Yeah, listen, absolutely. I didn't do my homework in high school. Yeah, apparently not. You did, Mark. Well done. No, for our first season opener was in Quebec, and I'm kind of the odd. In those days, the New England had 3 lines and 2 extra players. It's kind of the forward positions, and it was Gordie Howe and Jordy Douglas for the most part. Filler 9 and Filler 11, as he used to call us. But they had me on the power play, and so my very first shift and my very first shot in Quebec was a goal. I scored a goal, and it was assisted by Gordie Howe. And I get the puck. I mean, literally, this all happened very quickly in the first period, and I've got this puck, and I can remember walking out of the arena, and Gordie's kind of, and again, I'm trying to figure out where I fit in all this. And he kind of snuggles up and he says, hey, you got your first goal. Good for you. He says, that was my 2,500th assist. And I was gobsmacked, and I pulled the puck out of my pocket, and I go, do you want the puck? and he couldn't stop laughing. Of course it wasn't. But, it just totally totally floored me. But that you know Gord, you know
right.
what he was like, Gordie, and that was just, he'd had a great laugh at my expense, and I was laughing along with him. But yeah, that was my first outing, and then I remember getting rhubarbed by the guys. They consistently told me I was going to be the 80 goal scorer for the season. Wishful thinking, eh?
Well, it's your first pro season, as you said, working yourself into the lineup with a veteran team and some interesting, like you said, some interesting characters, not only the guys that you mentioned, but also eventually Blaine Stout and Mike Rogers, teams starting to come together. For yourself, I feel like you really kind of hit your stride in the postseason. After the regular season, they have the first round victory over the Cincinnati Stingers, and then, of course, into the semifinals, a 6 or 7 game series against the Edmonton Oilers with Wayne Gretzky. And I was curious, looking back at it, playing against Gretzky so many times that year. The league only had 6 teams, and so you probably played against Gretzky 12 or 13 times. What were your impressions of him then, and did you feel like he was going to end up being as prolific as he turned out to be?
Well, truth be told, the answer would be no. I didn't. Not a lot of people thought so. I don't think. I'll tell you why. Because there was a lot of conversation when because Wayne, as you know, he was in Indianapolis originally, and they weren't a very good team, and he was playing there, and it wasn't like you didn't know he was out there. You knew he was there, but you looked at him, and he was all of about $105, and he was, you just looked at him as like, he looked so, just physically standing there, he looked just so out of place. But he had obviously incredible hockey IQ, but it was a matter of people around him. But he, what was he, 17 years old, right, or whatever, and so to say to you honestly that, you could just tell he was going to be, this incredible point getter. I couldn't say that. You knew he was going to be a great player, but the secondary to that, Mark, was always the fact that everybody said, wait till somebody runs him over, though. Wait till they hit him. He's just a little guy, and well, of course, nobody ever hit him because they couldn't catch him, and he'd step out of the way. His periphery vision was unbelievable, but nobody knew that at the time. So, when we went into the playoffs that year, and as you say, beat Cincinnati, and I started to get more ice time with Whalers, and I know why, because it was, the older bodies were getting tired. We'd gone through a whole season. I was still pretty well rested and a young guy, and we took Edmonton 7 games actually, and it was a home series. We won every game at home, and they won every game at Edmonton. And I can remember the last game, the 6th game in Hartford, Springfield, and I scored, I think, 2 goals that game to push it to Game 7, and a couple of the older guys were looking at me like, "What the hell are you doing? Now we got to go back to friggin' Edmonton," because there were no charters in those days, as you know. It was a milk run, but I hadn't played much all year, so this was my my time to play, and they beat us in Edmonton, of course, and then that was the end of the season, and I look back, and I don't think there's a player out there won't tell you, Mark, that it happens in a blur. Like 1 year of a hockey season is a blur, and that's how I felt my year was that year. And they went on to lose to Winnipeg, as you know, in the final Avco Cup, and a good choice I made. I have all the memories in Hartford, and everybody that signed with the Jets got the Avco Cup. So I don't have that to talk about, but I'm not going to trade any of my memories for that, for sure.
Speaking of that last year in the WHA, it was kind of a strange year because certainly as the year wore on, everybody knew that the teams would be going to the National Hockey League. So this was going to be the final season of the WHA. I was curious. I mean, what was the attitude like? I mean, just around the league. I mean, was the intensity level as high as it normally would have been? It's just a strange set of circumstances, knowing you're playing in a league for the final time.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because again, my first year, so everything to me is new, right? I don't have, truth be told, I have nothing to hold this season up to, right? But I've often described it, now that I've reflected on it, as kind of the year that they made up the rules as they went along. In this sense, like Indianapolis folded, so now they had to disband that team and rework the schedule. So you mentioned again Edmonton. We played them 7 times in the playoffs, home and home. I think you add in all the rescheduling of it, I think we played them something like 15 times that year.
Right.
And you just go, who the frig plays? What kind of league is that when you're playing? But that's what the WHA did to survive. And to your point about going to the NHL, I will tell you this as I stand here right now. When I left Hartford at the end of the season, I was told to take everything home with me, because there was not yet then a commitment 100% that there were any teams going to go to the NHL.
Mm-hmm.
So literally, when I left Hartford, I come back to Winnipeg to train and stay here. It was pretty much, from my point of view, I was told it was still up in the air. I could still be back in Hartford, and the league could still have another year under its belt, or it could be in the NHL, but under one. But where I only time would tell. So as it turned out, there was a lot of signs that was going to happen, but under one context, nobody seemed to know really until they announced 2 protected players and 2 goalies, and then everybody else went back to where they were drafted.
Right. Going into that 79-80 season, it was a very interesting season in hockey. It was a very interesting season to be around the Hartford Whalers, because there's some emotion there. You're going back into this NHL schedule. You've got Gordie coming back to the NHL at the age of 51. Davey, Keon, of course, in his pushing 40 at that point. One game I always remember from that year, I think it was the most special game of the early Whaler years, was Halloween in Toronto, as you guys play the Maple Leafs. Yep. Dave Keon returns home and he scores. Yep. Gordie scores. Tell me what that was like, going back to the Maple Leaf Gardens with those 2 in tow. Well,
Mark, let me set this up a little bit, if you don't mind, because people have asked me this before, like, what was it like for all the guys, like this, going to the NHL, and I always say, I didn't know any different. I didn't play in the NHL. I was just trying to better myself. I wanted to be a better player, and so wherever that league, wherever that took me, that's where I played. But for a lot of guys coming out of the WHA to the NHL, this was because they didn't get an opportunity at the NHL level previous. That's why they went to the WHA, made themselves there, and then then of course the NHL. So there was a lot of emotion. Guys were very emotional. Older guys coming into the NHL. Okay. Now, someone like Dave and not so much Gordie Howe, he was such an aberration. I mean, he was just a fun-loving guy. Just played, didn't matter. It just didn't matter. He just played. But Dave Keon was and some of those older guys, their loyalty they wore on their sleeves, and they were proud. Dave was a proud Maple Leaf that things didn't turn out there. So and they would basically, as I understand it, told, because he was just too old, and they let him go, and he was not, as it turned out. But for him to go back to Toronto and have success, not one day. I mean, he had success for a couple of years later in his, the first years of the NHL. Mm-hmm. Wow. I mean, it was so emotional. It was electric. I mean, I've been in some buildings over my career that there's emotion, and then there's this form of electricity. Right. I think of that game with Dave, but I also think of the return of Gordie Howe to Detroit. Mm-hmm. That was emotional, but there was electricity in that building. I don't know how else to explain it. It was just so incredibly special, and just so much going on. It was almost like like a whirlwind, like a tornado. It was just, everything was happening, and all good stuff. But for Dave to walk out of there and having scored a goal and prove that he could still play, I couldn't imagine what that man felt. Basically proving everybody in that in the owner's box wrong. It had to have been incredible for him too.
It sure was, and I think he chased Harold Ballard right out of his box. I think he left the game early in that 4-2 Whaler victory. As you noted, equally emotional, electric night at the Olympia in Detroit, or was it Joe Louis then? I can't remember.
It was Joe Louis.
It was Joe Louis.
That was the first year, yep.
Coming back, you've got the three Howes lined up, and another great night. But for yourself personally, you're on the left side with Dave, Keon at center. During the year, you've had Gordie as a right wing at some point, Tommy Rowe.
Yeah.
But regardless, you're flying. You've got 33 goals that year. Tell me a little bit about just working with Dave Keon on ice, and now your first year in the NHL, quickly establish yourself as a bona fide top flight left wing.
Yeah. Again, just things happen so fast. Like that year, people even you'd say this. There's certain years you'd like to live over again, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
For me, that would be one of them. But it was still, I didn't come out of the gate really well that year. I don't think I scored till either late October, early November. I mean, I don't want to say floundering, but I was like a lot of guys, young guys, just trying to figure it out now. Because not only did I have to figure out the WHA one year, the next year, now you're figuring out the NHL. And because I was protected, the Whalers were obligated to keep me for 3 years. They couldn't do anything with me. They couldn't trade me. They had to keep me. And so I felt this other part of pressure, as I look back on it, I felt like I had to, the old adage, I tried to do more than I probably should have, or probably what I could have done.
Mm-hmm.
And when you do that, Mark, you never play your game. You're doing things that you are outside your comfort zone, and so once I figured out and it took a while for them to figure out a line, but once they got me with Dave, it worked. It worked from the point of view of he was such a great passer. And my asset was speed, and if I could just time it right, I could get some pressure down low with a pass from Dave and away I'd go type thing. But that took me a while to figure out, and because my first instinct was always, as soon as we had control, I'd take off like a bat out of hell trying to get up the ice, and Gordie Howe was the one who, this is a true story. This is, a couple times out, Gordie's on, as you say, on the right side. And he's about patience, you wait for the play to develop. Don't force it. And I would be forcing it at the blue line. I'd be flying up there, wanting the puck. Give me the puck. And I, he'd say to me over and over, look, Jordy, I'm not giving you the puck. Don't force the play. Let it develop. And then he says to me one time, look, if you keep doing this, I'm going to fire that puck at you. and I'm just a kid. I took off again. Son of a gun, if he doesn't fire the puck, it hits me right between the shoulder blades. And he's laughing away. This is in the game, and he's looking at me like, I told you, dumbass, slow down. And so it took a while for me to figure out pace of play, and I'm playing with guys that, aren't as fast as me only because of age and what have you. And once I figured that out and what have you, it became a very workable role for me, and I got lots of chances playing with those guys, lots. And when you get chances, they're going to go in. I mean, that's what happens when you're a goal scorer.
Right. So that second half of that year, you really come into your own, and then fate strikes in game, I believe, about 3 games left in the season or so.
Yeah.
You break your collarbone and eventually miss the playoffs.
Yeah.
And that sets in motion a series of, for lack of a better term, bad luck in your career and this is something that always gets underrated. You've got I think you broke your foot in the mix. You had the shoulder injuries, and it takes the momentum out of your career. Yeah. And I'm just curious, Jordy, looking back psychologically, you're very young at that point. How are you handling that? One after the other, those serious injuries?
Well, I didn't handle it well. I didn't have the tools to handle it. If it happens to me today, and all the experience in my life, I can deal with it. But I didn't have the tools. I'd never been hurt before, and And Mark, you're right. I mean, it just started to snowball. It was one after the other, and they were getting worse. I mean, I should have lost a whole season with my shoulder surgery, but I was so bored to death. I rehabbed and got back early, and I shouldn't have got back because I wasn't, my shoulder wasn't 100%, but they played me anyway. And so two things happened. One is I didn't have the tools to deal with it. All I knew was I had to get back, and I worked hard to do that. And then what ends up happening back then that's a little different than today. So today, if you're hurt, I mean, literally, they park you till you're 100%, literally. Mm-hmm. And back in my day, the concern was always that if you're not in the lineup, then you might not have a spot in the lineup. And so that always hung over me, and so I wanted to get back, and then when I did get back, one of the things that when I reflect on my career, especially when I left Hartford, but when I got to Minnesota and then Winnipeg, was I became somewhat of an insurance policy for teams, mm-hmm. and because I could play any forward position. I could play right wing, left wing, or center. When I went to Minnesota, they had me all over the map, and I was capable enough to do that. But they would look at me and say, "Well, we're going to play so and so today because he can only play left wing, or
right.
he can only play." So I ended up spending like a lot of time in the press box and not getting in the lineup at all for the most part. And then when I did, they would put me in roles that, because I could skate and I could check and I could do all these other things. They'd put me in those roles, and the responsibility to score wasn't. I didn't see power play ice time. I didn't see, the ice time I got in Hartford, and so it's kind of a, a catch-22 to be good enough to do lots of things and not just do one thing. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what ended up happening. And not that I begrudge myself. I'm glad to say I could do all that. But I didn't get a resurrection out of my career until I ended up going to Europe and playing in Finland, and they let me score goals again. So my first year NHL, they let me score goals, and my last years in Finland, they let me score goals, and everything in between was kind of doing my job, so to speak.
It goes to show you sometimes a guy you may have played with, for example, in Springfield. You were there briefly in the AHL. Charlie Simmer, and I think of guys
Bingo.
like him.
Yep.
It's sometimes fate and luck and circumstance come into play, and where you end up, and who your line mates are, most importantly, who your coach and GM are, and what role you have. Really, when you judge a player's career, you have to kind of look beyond numbers sometimes and look at what the circumstances were, because they change here or there, and then it's a whole different situation in your career. You go to Minnesota, let's say Lou Nanny, whomever says, okay, bingo, you're going to play in the second line, you're going to be in the left wing, period, and you're going to stay here and enjoy your 80 games. That's a different circumstance, of course, and as you said, bouncing all around. And luck and fate and things that are out of your control. It's very humbling sometimes, I suppose, to look back at that, but it's definitely a factor. And I thought of that last night. I was in the Boston Garden, and we're in the alumni box, and I was with John Busick, who's 84 or 5, and he played 20-plus years and almost perfectly healthy all the way through, and he still gets around great now. And next to him was another player who didn't play in the NHL long, played about 30 games, and has had 2 knee replacements, 2 shoulder reconstructions, 2 hip replacements, et cetera, et cetera. And it's just one of those things. I mean, who knows what it is, but
you hit the nail on the head. It's almost like life in a lot of ways. It's not always what you know; it's who you know, and you get yourself into a situation, and it can work for you, and it can also work against you. So, and again, I don't begrudge it. It's just that was my walk. That's what happened to me, but yeah, you're right. I know guys that didn't play that much and are beat up pretty bad, and other guys. I mean, if you think about careers, Mark, most guys who had long careers, if you think about it, never really had major injuries for the most part.
Right.
The minute you start getting hurt, joints especially, knees, ankles, hips, shoulders, your career starts to struggle because your body, as well as they can fix it, you're never the same. You're never the same.
No, especially then, where it was a relatively primitive medical care back then. I know we have just a few more minutes, Jordy, but Mike Corrigan, a guy as well. I was talking with him in the previous podcast, and he gave an example of how his career ended in Buffalo with a broken ankle, and what the trainers did was wrap game programs around his ankle, taped him up with hockey tape, and sent him off to the hospital, and that's just the way that was then. So, Jordy, you go to Finland, enjoy some great success there. I think you, as you said, you rejuvenated yourself, enjoyed the game again. However, by 86, 87, a couple things enter into your life, and I'm curious about this.
Yeah.
First of all, sadly, at a very young age, your dad passes away, and that's tough. And that impacts you as it did myself. I went through a similar experience. So you've got that hanging over you. Your career comes to a conclusion. You have the opportunity to go back to the NHL. I think you've articulated before that you pretty much had your fill at that point.
Yep.
Where are you mentally? You're back home. It's like a Tuesday in November. And your whole life has been like schedule, be here, be there, be there, to give it a thought, and you're there, and it's over. Like it's over. Yep. You've made a decision. It's over. Where are you mentally, and what is your objective next? Yeah.
Well, there isn't one hockey player in the world doesn't go through this at some point, right? I didn't know anything else. I played till I've had two careers in my life. I played till I was 30, and now I'm in business, and I've been at it 30 years. I'm pretty fortunate. Mm-hmm. But Mark, I was telling you earlier about you asked me about injuries, and I didn't have the tools to deal with all that, and I really didn't. And ironically, when my dad died, I was playing in Finland. Just came out of a great season. I actually just went back to, I scored a goal a game, 36 goals. I scored 36 times in 36 games. Still a team record over there, and just everything that could go right did. And then the next year in October, my dad dies, and he has a massive heart attack. He's 56, and I don't have the tools to deal with this. I don't. I'm on my own. I was never married during my career. I lived on my, I was a single guy, and I really enjoyed myself. And I go back so I come for my dad's funeral. And they give me time off to come home, and I really don't even want to go back. Like, I'm just a basket case. This is really kicked me in the side of the head. But my mom convinces me to go back, and I do. But I am nowhere near mentally capable of functioning. And sadly, I got into some extracurricular activity. I drank a little bit too much, and I just didn't want. I don't know what it was, but at that time I just didn't want to deal with, let's call it reality. And I kind of blame myself. I mean, I was arguably 10,000 miles away. Like, I could have helped my dad if I was here. I mean, that you just go through so many things. And when the season ended that year, and in hindsight, I don't know why they even kept me around. I was pretty much uninvolved, but they did, and I finished the year and came home. I literally came home, and I remember you asked me about a Tuesday. Well, I can tell you, I can remember I had a house here in Winnipeg, and I had a dog, and my dog and I would sit, and I wouldn't know what day it was, but I'd be drinking beer and having a pizza. And I'd never been able to do that. I didn't know if it was Sunday or Tuesday or Thursday. I had no idea, but I ordered a pizza, and I'd be drinking beer looking out the window. And I did that far too long. I did that for a while, and I had phone calls to go back to Europe to play, and I just kept saying no. And in hindsight, if I look at my life today, it's turned out great. I'm not lying, but I should have gone back because I really enjoyed that, but I wasn't prepared. It took me arguably 3-4 years to work through that, and through my dad, and just mature as a man. But I got through it with some really wonderful support. My business partner is a brother from another mother. That's Ted Irvin, the old New York Ranger. Mm-hmm. And he and I have been in business for 30 years together. I love the man. He's just it's worked out so well for us and families and so on and so forth. But he was a real mentor to me, helped me get through it. as did Ray Neufeld eventually. Good old Ray. He and I were roommates junior. We're still wonderful friends today. And another friend of mine, Kim Davis, he played in junior. He played in Flin Flon, and he became the Manitoba Junior Hockey Commissioner here. And if it wasn't for these other men in my life, seriously, who mentored me, and this is something men don't do enough of, talk to each other.
Right.
I don't know what would happen, but they really, really helped me and got me back on track, so to speak. And you know what? I got through it. But if I summarized it real quick, Mark, I'd say I quit way too quick. I exited way too fast, and justified it in my mind. And but I'm not. Please don't think I'm regretting it. I mean, my life is marvelous. I have a wonderful time. I do a lot of things. I've got great friends, great family. But if I look back, I didn't have the tools I have today that would have helped me get through that.
Well, you certainly seem to have peace of mind, and from meeting you and from seeing you at various things, and from following yourself on Facebook and wherever, it just seems like you have you're in a good place mentally and enjoying your life now. And you've had to work hard to get there. Ted Irvin, you noted, was a great mentor. He went through the same thing. I remember him talking about that when his career was over and what do you do next. But getting into the financial services business, which reminds me of one of the things I wanted to close with, Jordy, is the corollary between, we've talked a lot about challenges today that you've had in your life and overcoming those challenges, the corollary between being a hockey player in your hockey career and how those lessons translated into your business success.
Oh yeah. It's interesting, Marco. I will say this publicly, and I'll from the rooftops. I will put a hockey player / athlete in front of anybody at any time, and knowing that they will battle. You can have every degree under the sun, but if you don't know what it's like to battle every day, you might not have much success. But if you put an athlete who's had to work every day to succeed, to be the best they can be, I will take them hands down. And the best way to describe it is in our day when we played, if you had a bad day, and we weren't, bad days, everybody has a bad day, and you're entitled to that bad day. But in hockey, for example, you couldn't have two. If you had 2 bad days, somebody was taking your job. And you learned really quickly to get over yourself, get over that, get through it. Whatever it takes, make sure the next day is a better day than the last day. And in business, it's worked marvelously well. I still have bad days, Mark. I really do. I'm a human being, but I don't let them add up. I don't let them multiply. I move on. My son said to me many years ago, when he's 25 now, and he'd say, I remember distinctly him saying to me, like, Dad, why are you always happy? And I go, son, it's a choice. You have a choice every morning. You can be happy, you can be miserable, you can be a PRICK, you can be whatever you want, but it's your choice. And you know what? I live by that. It's your choice every day if you want to smile or you want to be a PRICK. And I choose to smile. And the more you do it, Mark, the easier it is to do.
Well, it is infectious, and certainly anyone who spends time with Jordy Douglas will be smiling because you're a good guy and a friendly and intelligent guy. We greatly appreciate the time today. I've wanted to do this for a while, so we appreciate that. And Jordy, good luck, and we look forward to seeing you, I'm sure, hopefully next summer in Hartford, Connecticut.
I tell you what, Mark, my wife's got it on the calendar. Are you kidding me? We're not missing that. Come hell or high water, that is such a good time. So I look forward to seeing you then, too, okay?
Thanks, Jordy. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Mark, very much. Appreciate it.
Take care.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Pro Hockey Alumni Podcast. Be sure to visit us at prohockeyalumni.org.